Sorry, it just started recording. So again, I'm a clinical psychologist. So part of my work is to work intimately with people and understand their stories and understand their pain and their struggles. And I would notice consistently how all roads led back to childhood, how every client who came to me as an adult was suffering from a dysfunctional core belief system, a dysfunctional pattern that had been set decades earlier. And prior to becoming a parent, I began to notice and felt very impassioned about early childhood. But when I became a parent, everything changed to an even more extreme degree. You know, before we become parents, I don't know how many of you are parents here, but before we become parents, we have this very grandiose delusion about how we're going to be as parents. We are the best parents till we become one. And we all have this fantasy that, you know, no matter how, you know, every person around us is messing up with their children, we somehow are going to be superhuman. And I too entered this journey with this presumption that I was a psychologist, I had been a meditator. Surely I would be immune to the perils of unconscious parenting. And little did I realize that no one is immune to the unconsciousness of parenting. No one, because we've never met these children. And because we've never met these children, just by that fact of them being so unknown to us, just by that fact, they have the potential to trigger within us elements of our psyche that were otherwise buried, otherwise suppressed. So just by the unknown nature of children, we are now exposed to a volatility of our emotionality that we never knew we had. How many of you here saw how crazy you can become, but never thought you were that crazy till you became a parent, right? None of us realized that we were so emotionally immature, so emotionally dysregulated till we became a parent. And part of that is because of the unknown element of parenting. So when I became a parent, I began to realize that, wow, we are really ill prepared for this journey. It's the only job in the world for which there is no license, no continuing education, no mental status questionnaire. We don't have to fill out any form. There's no requirement to become a parent, to do the most sacred job in the world. And the reason why there's no requirement is because of something very specific. And I'm going to tell you what it is. There's a reason why there's no requirement. And the reason is because culture around the world has decided that parents know best. We know best. So we became parents because we thought we knew best. We became parents because we didn't think there was anything to it. We became parents because we thought we would just know what to do because these children came to us biologically, for those of us who are biological parents. Now, why is this important? I'm saying something so obvious, but the reason I'm mentioning it is because it has very toxic implications. The toxic implication of not being prepared, of not thinking we should be prepared, of being told we know best, that we just will know what to do, creates a combination of belief systems that are toxic. And what are they? They create a mentality and an approach that we are superior and that we are in control. This is the foundation of toxicity in childhood. Our parents and us as parents, we think we know best and we are to be in control. So therefore, when we are not in control, what do we feel? Imagine your child is not falling to your control. Your child is being naughty, being bad, being unmotivated, being lazy, all the labels. We've been told we should be in control. The child is not under our control. Look what a tension that creates inside us. What a deep conflict. Everything in our subconscious belief system says, I should be in control. I should have control. The child should be under my control. And here you have a child not under your control. This creates a fundamental clash of the titans within us. And that's why we explode at our children, because we were given the wrong idea, a lie that we should be in control. Number two, we were told we should know what to do. We should have it under control. We should be the best. Now, when the child is not listening, it makes us feel like utter failures. We feel so helpless. We feel like we're 2 years old. Now, the subconscious belief system is you should know best. You should know best. And you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do right now. Again, tension. So what happens? We blame the child. We yell at the child. We then have a name for it. It's called discipline. We can discipline the child. Like, how delusional is the system that we've even pedestalized discipline? So we're told discipline the child. But really, what is discipline? Punishment. And what is punishment? Artificial control. And what does artificial control do? It shames, it fears, it degrades the child. So this is how our system is set up. And it is deep inside us. When I became a mother and I saw what an utter psycho lunatic I was like, wait a second, I'm screaming at a 2-year-old? I'm losing my shit, like my hair is falling out. At a 2-year-old? I saw that I'm out of control. One day I froze my face. I was screaming at my kid and I froze my face. You should try this. And I took it to a mirror. Have you ever done this? Take your screaming face to a mirror. You will be horrified at what you see. But also I saw in my reflection, not just an out of control lunatic. What I also saw was a desperate human being, completely lost, completely feeling like a failure, overwhelmed, and no help in sight. That is when I discovered that I was not in charge. What was in charge was my ego. My ego that thought it should know what to do and thought that it should be in control. And your ego and my ego and every parent out there, their ego is running the ship. And as long as our ego is running the ship, the ego has two components. I should know best. I do know best. And I should be in control and I will be in control. These two lies of the ego keep us in absolute disconnection with our children. And if I that day was not willing to realize, oh my goodness, I am fully in ego. I don't love my kid. I love my ego. In fact, the reason I had a kid, now to think about it, was for my ego. I had a kid. And you had a kid for your ego. Honestly, you did. Because if you didn't have it for your ego, there would be no such thing called discipline, and we wouldn't be getting angry with our children. We get angry with our children to the degree that I'm talking about, like really upset, is because they don't follow our movie. They don't follow our expectations. And because we have these expectations and they are here, they live in this reality and we have this expectation, there's another clash going on. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we enter parenting thinking that we're going to be so loving and so kind. But in the end, we find ourselves just being the most vicious people on earth. And there's a reason for it. We're not mean inherently. We're not evil inherently, but we are severely delusional. And that's when I began to teach conscious parenting. And many parents didn't like me. You may not be like me right now. You may be saying, oh, you are unconscious, not me. But let me tell you, I have never yet met a conscious parent. Okay. I've met a conscious parent in motion, in progress, but I haven't yet met a conscious parent. And this is what I'm so passionate about. And this is why I've created this movement, really, because the more we pretend we're conscious, the more we will harm our children under the disguise of love. All our fearing of our children, fear mongering, all our shaming of our children, all our punishment comes from our primitive understanding of how we are to be parents, from how our parents parented us. And there is a severe disconnection happening in the world. It happened in your generation, and it's happening in our children's generation. And until we parents wake up to realize how we are perpetuating toxic cycles, we will then be raising the next generation of children who don't know who it is they are. So conscious parenting is a new model. What I teach in my books, I've written many books, 5, 6 books, I think. Conscious parenting is a new model to revolutionize the way we live in the world. And it is predicated on 3 basic changes, shifts. And number 1 is that, no, we do not control our children. Control will never bring about what we desire. We all desire for our children to have self-worth, self-honor, self-direction. Control is the worst way to get that. And most of us use control in our daily parenting. We call it love and we call it care. But if we're really honest, it's just blind control. And control according to what? To our fantasy, to our movie. If we wanted to play the piano, or we thought we would have a child who would be Beethoven or Mozart, we want our children to be Beethoven and Mozart. It's all coming from our movie. Number 2, the second big shift in conscious parenting is that the traditional model says that we should raise superstars. We should raise super achievers, super academic, super talented, a little bit of Julia Roberts, a little bit of Michael Phelps, a little bit of Oprah, a little bit of Einstein, a little bit of everybody, Mother Teresa. And that is our vision. We are curating childhood to create a product. Childhood is no longer a childhood. It is a machinery to create a product. We send them to schools, which are a factory. Culture has become so robotic that we have robbed our children of childhood. Childhood that is meant to be play, rest, relaxation, boredom, nature, physical, movement, creativity, imagination, restlessness. That is the hallmark of childhood. And we have robbed our children of childhood because we're trying to create a product which is a supersonic, super achieving human. That is a lie. And as long as we go down that path, we will create disconnection with our children and low self-worth. Because a child who thinks that their identity is based on these metrics of success, narrow metrics of success, we will raise children who have low self-worth. And the third big shift in conscious parenting is to move away from this idea that traditional parenting has, that I need to raise a happy child. Most of us parents go, I just want to raise a happy child. But that is such a toxic idea. I know you must be like, what? What is she talking about? You'll have to read my books more, but to be brief, this whole idea that we need to raise happy children comes from our own inability to be unhappy, our own inability to manage big emotions. And because we were raised cut off from our big emotions, we want our children to not have big emotions. We just want them to have big happiness because that way we feel successful. So conscious parenting talks about moving away from control into connection. The biggest mantra of conscious parenting is connection before control and correction. The second thing is move away from achievement, perfection, superstardom, competition, and try to understand who your children are and develop a sense of worth in them that is based on their essence, their being, not on their doing. And that takes hard work from the parent. Just today, I was with a mother who said to me, but my daughter's driving me crazy. She's not passing her grades. She's getting such low grades. How can I tell her I love her when I'm so angry with her? And I showed her how she has connected her love for her child with the child's performance at school. And the minute you connect love and worth with performance and achievement, you will create low self-worth. And the third element is moving away from this idea of happiness into this recognition that children should be authentic. Teach your child to be authentic. Teach a child to be ordinary. Teach a child to be human, not to be happy, not to be perfect. So in order to become a conscious parent, we first have to undo the toxic belief systems that we have in our mind. The second step in conscious parenting is that we need to heal ourselves. Conscious parenting is about raising yourself before you raise your child, is understanding that you have an inner child from childhood that is screaming for healing. And until you pay attention to your inner child, you will not be able to attune to the child before you. And then the third stage of conscious parenting is connecting with the essence of who your child is. So there are 3 stages in the conscious parenting journey. Number 1 is what I've been talking about. Change your belief systems, the lies of traditional parenting. Number 2, hire a coach, get a therapist, and do your own healing work. And in this book, The Parenting Map, I outline these 3 stages. And the third stage is, how do I truly connect with my child? How do I understand their essence? Do I even see my child for who it is they are? Do I celebrate and honor my child? Or am I only interested and obsessed with creating a product? Childhood is not about creating a product. Childhood is about allowing children to discover who it is they are. You are an usher. You are a guide. You are a friend. That's all you are. You are not the leader in their journey. You are not the movie maker. You are not the tyrant. You are not the boss. You have to learn who you are as a parent. Your sacred role as a parent is to be a spiritual guide for your children, to make their own mistakes, to fail in their own failures, and to discover their own destiny. So thank you for listening. I'm going to take a few questions from you.
Thank you, Dr. Shefali. Yeah, it was very insightful. So yeah, open up for questions. If anybody has any, just fire them into the chat and we'll ask away. We've got about 8 minutes left before Dr. Shefali needs to head off for another engagement. So assuming everybody knows how to use the chat, I'm just keeping an eye on things here.
How do you make your child listen to you?
Yes, there we go.
You make your child listen to you by becoming the best listener, by not making them listen to you, by creating a buy-in so that they listen to you as part of the flow of the day versus, now you listen to me. The child will listen to you when you engage with them in a way that's connected. When they see that you're doing this, and then they'll do that. When they see that it's collaborative, it's connected, it's negotiated, it's a win-win situation for both. Conscious parenting is, in a nutshell, about the parent understanding that their unconsciousness is ruling the roost. Their patterns from childhood are in play right now. Most of us think that we are raising the child before us, but most of us are dealing with the inner child. And that inner work is what conscious parenting is about. And it's a deep philosophy, so you're going to have to read the books, but it is a game changer in how we raise our children. It's a whole new way of raising our children. How do you undo the damage that you may have done? you start in the moment, you start here right now, you really take it seriously, you take the courses, you read the books, you get your own degree in parenting, you do the work. And the moment you start changing, and even with the one awareness, if you can take away today, is asking yourself, how is this moment about me? What about this moment is really about me? You can ask yourself, wow, is this really about my child, or is this about my expectation, my fantasy, my fear? Just shifting the spotlight from your child to yourself is the first step of conscious parenting. So I have tons of courses that break this down. You can take any course and start your journey anywhere. What are some examples of conscious parenting as a single parent? It doesn't matter if you're single or double or triple. Conscious parenting is always done by the singular person. You don't need permission from a partner. You don't need a partner. You are the whole world of consciousness, and you can begin right now. Conscious parenting is looks like this in action. Your child doesn't listen to you. You tell them, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. They do it. In that moment, instead of reacting, instead of screaming, instead of yelling, you find a way to meet them in their failure, in their mistake, in their humanity. I always say that children only misbehave because of one of three reasons. That's it. Number one, lack of skill. They just don't have the skill. Their brain is still developing. Number two, lack of experience and practice. They haven't lived long enough. Number three, lack of worth. If you can remember that, it's a game changer. You will never scream at your children again, because children do not make mistakes or do anything wrong other than these three things. You think they're doing it because they're manipulating you. You think they're doing it because they're disrespecting you. You think they're doing it because they're bad children, because that is your old belief systems. In conscious parenting, there are no bad children. There are no bad children, and there are really no bad parents either. They're just broken children and broken parents. So it's a whole new reframe. Conscious parenting is about breaking away from the matrix. So if your child comes home with a C grade and you want to scream and yell, you take a pause. You begin to go deeper. Why is my child getting a C grade? Not that they have to get an A grade. It's why are they getting a C grade, and how can I support them? And sometimes to go, hey, C grade is better than a D, right? Maybe that's all we can do right now, and it's okay. It's removing ourselves from this idea that every kid needs to be an A grade kid. Ordinary is a good word. Average is not a dirty word. Since when did we become a culture that needs to raise A grade superstars? Every kid needs to be an A grade superstar. You know why? Because we are deluded. We are uncomfortable with being average. We're uncomfortable being ordinary. Yet, the ultimate joy is to be found in the ordinary. And that's what we need to reframe, because culture, frankly, has gone mad. We've gone mad, okay? And so on that optimistic note, I will leave you. No, I'm kidding. I really tried to say something optimistic. Oh, okay. Let me ask me a question so I can really be optimistic.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I can say that's optimistic.
So
when you practice conscious parenting, it really shifts your entire relationship. It's a relationship that creates a foundation for infinite self-worth in your children. And I've seen it. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing it since my early 20s. It is a game changer. It is revolutionizing the planet, and it starts with one parent at a time. So maybe one of you from today will read my books, will start practicing conscious parenting, and then the ripple effect will go out into the world. Yes, Gary.
Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. That's a good one to finish on. I've noticed there's a couple of comments in there that we're actually going to come on to in some of the other speakers. So I think these will be covered. So yeah, I think it was great. Really delighted to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And maybe we'll meet in Scotland one day.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Let's get on. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. okay, let's take a pause and just allow that to settle in, as that's our first speaker, Dr. Shefali. And we're going to move on to speak to Claire Ryan Heatley, who's our trauma specialist. And Claire, perhaps just an opener here. You know, we've been chatting offline previously, and you referred to the pandemic, for example, as a collective trauma. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, just so everybody can maybe understand that?
Absolutely, Gary. So when we think of trauma, trauma is about not having choice, not having control, not having a sense of safety and predictability. And these are all things, but very much a core part of our experience. Excuse me, sorry, I have a frog in my throat. It's also been about that sense of, ultimately, a felt sense of not being safe. So again, never have we, in most of our lived experience, had such a collective period of uncertainty, a period where we're being told to watch out, that something's coming for us, this virus. We had the lack of availability of those ready supports, the things that actually sustain us, that keep us resourced and regulated and allow us to be, to provide those buffers, those protective factors, if you like. So when we think about trauma's commonplace. If we're breathing, I think as human beings, we'll have experienced a trauma, because life can be messy, life can be difficult, but we're not all traumatized. And that's about how the things that are buffering us, the protective factors, support us to navigate those things. So again, when we think of trauma, we think of something that's leaving a lasting adverse imprint on us or effect on us. So when we put all of those things into the equation about the lack of choice and safety and control, and not having the things that were able to sustain us, and not having the support mechanisms and things around us that normally would aid us to weather storms and to come out hopefully a little bit bruised and battered maybe, but not traumatized from life situations. So yeah, absolutely, the pandemic has been a collective trauma for so many of us, because again, at the core of who we are as beings, we need connection. And somebody there in the chat mentioned about connection. And again, there was, for so many of us, our circle of connection and support was really, really compromised. Perhaps we had little bubbles, but that bigger, broader connection was compromised for all of us. So in terms of that, Gary, as well, again, something we touched on, the fact that when we think of the different parts of the brain and how we have that felt sense of safety and so forth, the part of the brain that helps us navigate stuff and where our fear center kind of lies is the amygdala, the fear center part of the brain. That's been on red alert for all of us, this idea of hypervigilance and just waiting for the next kind of bad news story. And let's be honest, we were saturated in a lot of bad news stories that perpetuated that sense of risk, unknown, and the continuity of that.
Absolutely. And, you know, we don't want to get too sciencey, I guess, but it'd be great to hear about some of the mechanics and the inner workings at play that can influence the window of tolerance, which is another topic that we've touched on outside of the call as well. Can you give a little bit more insight to that? Yeah,
sure. So people may already be familiar with this, maybe in their professional lives, but also that it may be something their children are starting to bring home from school, because in education, now, like Dr. Shefali touched on earlier, that we haven't always been told, the education piece didn't kind of extend to emotional intelligence, emotional literacy. We didn't always know how to know what was going on with our feelings, to name that and understand it. And we are starting to see that shift and change now, thankfully, in this generation. Schools are starting to, little ones coming home and talking about, I was in the red, I was in the blue, I was in the green. So for people who know this stuff, the language will be familiar, but a brief overview is it's a concept really of how our level of arousal and activation in our nervous system. So when we think of trauma, again, trauma at its core, it imprints on and impacts our nervous system to cause a level of arousal that feels too much, so it's dysregulated. So in terms of when we talk about being in our green zone, it's when we're in the flow, and we kind of use that in our language. We say things like, oh, I was in my zone, I was in the flow, and we know that's the place where we feel calm, we feel collected, we're able to respond rather than react, and we feel that we're able to manage. Let's say we're at home, our child knocks over a carton of milk that gets spilled. We're in the green zone, no problem. Let's get it tidied up. There's more milk, it's fine. You know, all is well. If we're in the red zone then and something like that happens, if we've moved out of our ability to kind of cope, because we can all only take so much. We all only kind of have so much of a saturation point, if you like, before it becomes too much. So if we've moved into that red zone and we're in that level of hyper arousal, maybe there's tension, there's angst, there's anger, there's frustration, perhaps anxiety, then when somebody, so if we're starting to head out of that green zone towards the red and our child knocks over the milk, suddenly it's much more reactive, it's rather than responsive. And it's when we maybe are very quick to anger or quick to be irritated. So that's the red zone. Is the kind of the best way to liken it is to start to think of it almost in terms of activation, like of the fire, like a volcano ready to erupt. So anxiety and anger tends to be those two states in that level of arousal. And then the blue one is a bit like an iceberg where somebody's kind of numbing out and it's cooling everything down. So that might look like kind of apathy or disinterest or even depression. And again, it's helpful for us to realize that it's really normal for us to move between these states. So let's say, for example, I'm getting organized, I'm going to work, or we're running late, getting the kids to the bus or whatever, and I move from my green into my red zone. Everybody gets off to where they need to be. I go into work and settle down. Maybe I'm sending emails and I zone out. Maybe I'm starting to kind of numb out in front of the computer. I go into my blue zone. I get up, I meet somebody at the kitchen, I have a wee chat, I'm back in my green zone again. So we move in and out of these states as a normal part of our day-to-day life activity. But what's really interesting is when we've had a lot of difficult times, a lot of chronic stress or trauma, then this green zone gets much narrower. So then we spill out of those zones much quicker into the red and into the blue.
Wonderful. And in terms of the window of tolerance, then, are there any techniques that you can use or recommend to people? You've maybe touched on some of them there, you know, in terms of things that we can do when we find ourselves in those, you know, those maybe higher stress situations. We can do things like talking to people, etc., that just helps just to bring us back down. But are there any other ones that you would recommend for people?
What I would say there, Gary, there's lots we can touch on, but actually the one first thing to really think about is about resourcing ourselves, because if we can resource ourselves, then we can better regulate ourselves and we can respond rather than be reactive. So resourcing myself versus yourself might look different, but it's anything that makes us go, that recharges our batteries. So we recharge our phones, we're now recharging our cars, we make time for those, we prioritize those things. But very often for us in our busy life as parents and so forth, our self-care heads to the bottom of that to-do list, and sometimes, let's be honest, it's not even on the to-do list because it's so large. So it's about, I would kind of really encourage people to think about resource first, then responsibilities. And that's again turning on its head the things that we're told that comes at the end as a reward once we've done all the hard work. But I would say if we are resourced better, and if we can get that in the diary and make that really matter, then we're going to show up as our best version of self, if you like, being responsive again, like Dr. Shefali touched on, where we're consciously choosing rather than being that triggered reactive place. So for me, things that really help keep me in my window are things like getting out with the dogs in nature, eating properly, having decent sleep, going for wild swimming. Sometimes I just kind of jump into the water and I literally feel it seep away, putting on music, having a good sing along, you know, just right now maybe stop and looking out. So again, head down on the laptop, busy, stopping and going, oh wow, look at the birds on the tree, or oh, look at that squirrel taking the nuts. Being in the moment, getting out of here, dropping into our body and moving out of that automated hamster wheel place that so many of us often go. And if we can create kind of this idea of micro moments of pause I speak about, where we harness those moments and where we stop and do something. Maybe that's every hour we set a phone on our alarm and it plays our favorite song, or maybe we remind ourselves that every time we get up to go to the toilet, we're going to take a few deep breaths. Or so it's just those little things can really sustain us, because if we wait until the end of the to-do list piece, maybe the weekend or the holidays, where then we look after ourselves, we're going to be depleted and we're not going to be showing up as our best version of self in that window, if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. And just would you say then that, you know, because of the I guess touching on some of the points that Dr. Shefali made around the fact that, as parents, we can be oblivious sometimes of things that we're doing and maybe the sort of impact that could be having. And is it the case that trauma, sometimes the word is, everybody's got their own sort of definition of it, and sometimes with some people it's quite a heavy word, and for other people it's not so heavy. But is it an unavoidable part of life that we experience trauma to some degree?
Yes, so I'll pick up on one word you said there, if that's okay, Gary, before I answer your question directly. And this idea of being oblivious to it, we do and we are. None of us go into this job of being parents thinking I'm not going to show up as my best version. We want always to endeavour to do our best and be our best. It's about cutting ourselves some slack and recognizing we do the best with the resources and the knowledge that we have in any given moment. When we know better, we can do better and we can choose better. So this idea of being oblivious, our old patterns. So when we go out of our window, when we go back to that reference, and when the part of the brain, the fear, when we're chronically stressed or triggered or whatever it might be activated in some way, that logical part of our brain, we no longer kind of are operating from that place, and we go into the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, and that's when we go to our default patterns, the things we've always done. So for me, one of my default patterns is flight, busy, do, and I have to stop and catch myself and notice I'm going there, to show up in the present moment and to bring that awareness and to say, hold on a minute, be with what is happening right now. So this idea is, again, that we get into the doing rather than the being that Dr. Shefali touched on, because we're conditioned to believe doing is what we need to do, but also it's a survival pattern for so many of us, this reactivity and this being on. So I would say there's something about allowing ourselves that space to, one, be kind and compassionate with ourselves and to know that we're doing our best. But yes, being human's messy, and I don't think any of us will get out of this unscathed. So whether it's the big T trauma stuff, the difficult stuff, maybe like assault or abuse, or what we might call the small T stuff like bereavement and bullying, that are still, can be over time really impact us. I don't think any of us will navigate life without being impacted in some way. But it's also about normalizing that and saying it doesn't make me any less, and it's not a sign that I'm not strong enough or I'm not coping, or it's not a judgment on my parents or my parenting, because the reality is something as simple as my daughter, I've got two daughters and I've got 3 older stepchildren, so a family of 5, and life is busy. So maybe they come in, my head is in something I've just been doing at work, and maybe I don't show up for my little girl in the way that she wants me to be present with her, to really give her my attention, to really say, I hear you, I see you, you matter to me. Maybe I'm distracted and she's getting the message of mom doesn't care, she doesn't love me, because the meaning making that children make, they respond to from their perspective of the world, and then they make meaning of their interaction with us. And I remember, especially when our children are very little, the world revolves around them. So if anything is going on in their world, they don't stop to think, well, maybe mom's got a lot going on. They just think, she doesn't care, she doesn't love me, perhaps, and we jump to those kind of meaning making. So something for me that really helped was when I heard about this concept of good enough parenting, and that we only have to get it right 60% of the time. I was like, so there's margin for me to maybe get it a little bit wrong and not show up as present as I would like, or as responsive as I would like to my family 40% of the time. And that really allowed me to move away from this drive to be perfect and to get it right, because in doing that, it can steal so much pleasure, because we're trying to be perfect, which is unrealistic on ourselves in a world that is demanding, and then we expect perfectionism of our children in return. So yeah, I think it's a fairly present concept that we need to get kinder at accepting and acknowledging, and then again, very much being compassionate with ourselves around that.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It's getting the knowledge out there and the awareness out there of some of the things that can cause trauma to different degrees in children is not a criticism of parents. It's helpful for parents moving forward to be aware of this stuff. And this is one of the reasons why this event exists tonight, because we're trying to help to give information to parents that can really feel practical for them to go away and then implement in their, in their own homes, as Dr. Shefali said, working on ourselves as well as an important part of that. We can't, we can't do one without the other. But if we can get more information out here to people where they're aware of that, what we're going to do is we're going to be helping children come through with less of these things that they've experienced, or certainly a deeper level of maybe connection in terms of conversations with children to help to explain situations in a way that the child will understand. And I think that's the crucial component. And like you say, compassion is needed as we navigate that journey. And that's something that I'll be touching on a little bit in my talk as well. But yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Just one last comment, Gary, there again, as you're speaking. The thing that I found really interesting on my own journey is I was aware. I thought I was conscious. Again, I'd looked a lot at my own experiences in my past, my own traumas, if you like. I'd done a lot of self-healing. But what was really interesting, even with my very best intention, when I became stressed, I defaulted to those old parenting styles that had been very familiar for me. And I started to notice I wasn't parenting like the version of me that I wanted to choose to be when I was stressed, when I was out of my window. I was parenting in what I had seen done because they were familiar in default. So there's something about us, again, just noticing, catching ourselves and saying, okay, in this moment, who am I choosing, or how am I showing up, and how can I kind of course correct a little bit so I show up as the me I want to, rather than those old patterns and beliefs that Dr. Shefali spoke about. But thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation. So interesting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. So I guess just encourage anybody who has any questions relating to Claire's talk to just drop them into the chat. And what we'll do is we'll collate those, and we will we'll dive into as many of those as possible as we get to the final 15 minutes of the session. So thank you, Claire. Great. So how am I feeling? Nervous, heart's beating, mouth's getting drier. But apart from that, I'm doing great. I'm doing good. So I'm going to kick off with my talk. And the talk is called The Journey from Head to Heart. But just a brief introduction to me, just for those that have maybe joined a little bit later when we did the intros at the start. My name's Gary Young. I'm the founder of the Mindful Enterprise. And our mission is to increase health and well-being and unlock human potential through the power of mindfulness. And I want to begin my talk by sharing an important part of my story with you. And 7 years ago, my son was 12 at the time and was going through his transition to high school, and was struggling a bit to adapt to his new surroundings and all the pressures that a young person goes through at that age. And I could see he was unhappy, so I asked him to share how he was feeling. And he replied, "I just don't want to be here." And his words hit me straight in the heart. And it's something that I'll never forget, but it brought me instantly present when he said those words, because he was communicating the way that I felt. You see, I was also going through a transition after leaving a 23-year corporate career to follow my heart into a new field, to create a social enterprise in a sector that was completely new to me. And it brought up a range of feelings. And I had been battling with depression for a few months until that conversation, which was the catalyst for my recovery. So the moral of that short story is that our children are not separate from us. They are here as our teachers to help us to learn, to help us to grow. So my first tip for you is just to share something that I've done fairly consistently since that point, and that's to ask myself, is this also in me? Every time that I witness something in my son that he's finding difficult, or when he displays a behavior that I don't feel aligns with his highest potential, which also means that it doesn't align with my highest potential either, but it could also be within me. So this is an important aspect that I've certainly learned over my journey, and it's thanks to my son that I've been able to learn that. So I'm grateful. So sometimes when I ask that question, the answer is no. It could be that the characteristic that he's displaying is in his mum. But quite often the answer is yes, and it gives me something to work on. So I want to just pause very briefly after that, and I want you to invite you all to join me in a brief moment of taking 3 conscious breaths. So what do I mean by conscious breaths? What I mean is that we have full awareness of the breath in, and we have full awareness of the breath out. And the invitation is to do this in just a moment, either with our eyes open or with our eyes closed. And if we want to close our eyes, that can sometimes minimize the sensory input so that we can focus inward, just to check in with how we are. How am I? So that's what this opportunity is for us all to do now. And you can begin just whenever you're ready. And then just opening the eyes when you're ready. So perhaps if anybody wants to share in the chat what they noticed, how they felt during that short momentary pause, just to check in, just to notice how you are. What did you notice about the breath? And I'm going to keep going with my talk, but we'll come on to some of these towards the end. So just moving on to my talk, just exploring a little bit more about the role of mindfulness in healing and facilitating individual and collective progress. So the practice, this is a practice that has, been particularly beneficial to support me on my healing and personal growth journey. It's been fundamental, and it's something that I firmly believe can play a very important role in helping society to evolve through beyond its current challenges. And so 4 of the key main benefits of mindfulness that I want to share with you now. And the first one is a greater ability to regulate our attention so that we can direct our attention to everything that really matters. Stress reduction, which supports our health and well-being. Less worrying, and an increase in awareness and perspective taking. All of these are fundamental not only to our quality of life, but also to help us to fulfill our potential. And I'm aware that some of you will be familiar with mindfulness and others less so, but in terms of a simple definition for mindfulness, it's knowing what's happening while it's happening. And if we learn how to be present more often, we increase our awareness of the arising of thoughts in the mind and the emergence of feelings and sensations in the body and everything that's happening in our external environment, then what it means is that we're going to be more in control of what's happening inside of us and outside of us and be able to make good choices in the moment. So we train our minds by intentionally bringing our attention back into the present moment, using different supports, one of which is the breath, another of which can be sound, another of which can be body awareness. And when the mind wanders off into thinking, we gently guide our attention back to one of these supports. And this technique, when we apply it consistently, increases our level of awareness and self-control, minimizes our susceptibility to get involved in negative and unhelpful thinking, and it helps to reduce our stress, as I touched on earlier. And this technique gradually allows us to do something that we call decentering. So that's how we can unhook or detach from the thinking mind, and it creates space for us to be able to observe our thoughts rather than be caught up in the story. And this is a very, very important skill for us to be able to develop, because it can create a lot of freedom this idea that we need to be at the mercy of our thoughts all the time, 24/7. We don't have to be. But when we learn this skill, it's something that can be quite life-changing for a lot of people. And for me, it certainly was. So it's allowing us to create this space, which then allows us to an opportunity for perspective taking and to choose a skillful and balanced response that helps us and others to truly flourish. So just as Claire highlighted, this is the power of pausing and noticing before responding. It's conscious and it's considered. So rather than automatic, which is coming from habit and past conditioning. And this is how we can regulate and upgrade our behaviours. And in doing so, we can create new connections and pathways in the brain. So if we pause for reflection just for a moment and imagine how our homes and how our communities could be enhanced when more individuals acquire these skills, including our children, would we still see the same levels of mental health challenges, or would it improve? And from my personal perspective, it would really improve. And that's why the Mindful Enterprise is here. That was one of our missions and one of our passions, to make sure that we could make this practice as accessible as possible to more people so that we can realize more of our innate potential. So just moving on a little bit in my talk, just to explore this idea of navigating the path home to the body. And some of the previous talks have been really fantastic at just opening the door to some of these topics already. But, you know, just if we think about this path home to the body, you know, this sense of, you know, to enhance our emotional literacy. And, you know, this is something that is really influenced by childhood, as has already been talked about in the earlier speakers. And the first thing to say is that, again, to repeat, the vast majority of parents do their utmost to be the best parents they can be for their children. We do the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time, but mistakes are inevitable. Trial and error is all part of the process. The concept of perfect parenting does not exist, despite how hard we try. And I am a recovering perfectionist, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. So I want to encourage everyone right now to be gentle and kind with yourselves. You've done many things right, and you are enough right as you are right here, right now. So don't forget that. So again, just a brief pause. Just allow that to settle in. And what we should not forget is that we were children once too. So we have our own unique experiences from that time, both good and not so good. We now know that helping children to develop emotional literacy is core to the development of their self-worth, self-confidence, and the ability to build secure connection in relationships. And emotion drives connection. And when we know how we feel, we can express it skillfully, the connection in our relationships deepens. Culture has unwittingly promoted disconnection from the emotional body, predominantly due to lack of awareness. And I'd like to provide a couple of examples to that. So a child is struggling to contain their emotion and has some kind of an outburst or displays some kind of behavior that the parent might find undesirable. And the response is, get to your room and think about your behavior. Or a child expresses some kind of emotion like anger, gets tearful, or does something in a public place that maybe draws attention, and we quickly try to shut it down and distract them to look somewhere else. And I've done this many times in the past. If we were shouted at or sent away to deal with our emotions alone as a child, does it feel possible that we might withdraw or isolate when going through a period of emotional difficulty as an adolescent or an adult? The message to a child that this can convey is that their emotions are unapproved of, that we need to go and deal with it by ourselves. So what we need to do instead as a parent, and this is through my own experience of failing many times is to co-regulate with the child, to help the child to calm themselves down, to learn more about the emotion, labeling it, and understanding what might have caused it. Were they frightened, for example? Is there a need that's not been met? Maybe they're hungry. Did something make them sad that day? And they're expressing it now at this time. So having a safe and secure attachment relationship with parents who are emotionally attuned and present, and where a child has the freedom to express all their emotions uninhibited, is essential for healthy brain and relational development. We know that now from studies. This isn't advocating that we become permissive parents. Healthy boundaries, communicated in a loving way, can also be needed at times. So this lack of emotional literacy can lead to dissociation, can lead to disconnection, as we've heard earlier as well from the other speakers. And this disconnection is from the body. And the route back to the body is through intentionally developing awareness of body-based feelings. And this is a key part of mindfulness meditation and an extremely important component for our health and well-being. So body-based sensations tell us how we feel, and successful relationships and cohesion in our communities all depend on understanding ourselves and others. And we can only understand ourselves and others when we know how we feel. So something called interoception, or body listening, is one of our other senses beyond the 5 more well-known senses of sight, touch, hearing, smell, and taste. And it's our ability to identify, understand, and respond appropriately to the patterns of internal signals. Scientists have shown that it's our sensitivity to interoceptive signals that can determine our capacity to regulate our emotions and our subsequent susceptibility to mental health problems such as anxiety and depression. So in addition to mindfulness, perhaps some kind of therapeutic support or some kind of therapy that involves helping to release emotional trauma, breathing techniques, somatic meditation, and Qigong, mindful movement, can be particularly effective in helping to navigate the path back to the body. So as we learn how to become more calm, more present, more connected and peaceful in our bodies, our hearts begin to open more because the feeling of safety has returned. And it's this newfound wisdom that can help us on our journey from head to heart. So my second tip for you is to prioritize practices that help you to step out of thinking and connect with the emotional body, to be present there. And another tip to share with you is the importance of turning towards our emotions rather than away from them. That's crucial. It's not very intuitive sometimes when we feel a strong emotion inside of us. We may immediately want to escape from that. And particularly if we think about that through the, through a child's experience, big emotions in a small body. Sometimes it can be very difficult to handle that or to understand what's happening. So the automatic reaction is to maybe to express it in a way that's maybe unskillful. But training courses like, for example, a mindfulness-based living course can provide a methodology for dealing with emotions in a very skillful way. And for those who have perhaps been through that path, they'll recognize it with things like the RAIN practice, which are really, really valuable in helping to develop a sustainably healthy way of managing our emotions. So just moving into the sort of final stages of my talk before we go into the Q&A, just want to touch briefly on the topic of deep listening, coaching and empowerment, just very briefly. So we think about our modern day world, which is this always on, busy, stressful, tech-driven world. And what it's created in humans, it's created fragmented attention. And this is not really the best foundation in terms of our capacity for deep listening and giving people our full and undivided attention. And as we heard earlier, feeling seen and heard is really key for creating successful relationships, including those with our children. And as parents and carers, we have an inherent desire for our children to be happy, as Dr. Shefali talked about earlier, to do well at school, to do well in their careers, their competitive activities, and socially. And sometimes we might find ourselves trying to rescue them. We've all been there, including me, trying to fix them even, or maybe even prevent them from experiencing some kind of pain, which in turn could prevent them from having an experience that they need to endure in order for them to learn and grow themselves. Sometimes all that's needed is for us to create a safe space with no distractions for children just to share and for us to listen, and to listen deeply. And this capacity really does come alive when we're conscious and deliberate. And when we're conscious and deliberate, this is, and we create this environment, this really safe space for that conversation to flow. It creates openness and receptivity. So our ability to hold this deep level of presence without trying to jump in too quickly with our own ideas, which is something that I've done myself many times before, and will probably do it again. It's inextricably linked to these two factors. One is our connection to our mind and our body, and the second is our ability to notice a stimulus but hold our seat without reacting to it. And this is why mindfulness as a practice is an incredibly important tool to help us connect more deeply at home and in our communities. So these are my closing reflections that I'm just about to summarise on how my parenting approach has changed over the years as I've become more mindful and more attuned emotionally to my son. So these were all the mistakes I made that are now being things that I do. I've let go of trying to control what he does. So again, in the spirit of Dr. Shefali's talk earlier, instead, I'm allowing him to lead and learn through experience and having autonomy. And I have become more of a partner or a coach. I've released any pressure that he might have felt about trying to make me proud of him by telling him that I love him unconditionally as he is right now. He doesn't have to do anything to gain my love. I'm validating his feelings rather than minimizing them, which is something that I have done in the past. I talk less and I listen more. Less teaching and lecturing, more coaching and empowering. I'm sharing my feelings and being vulnerable with him, and asking him regularly to share how he feels. Questions like, what could have made the day better for you? And I ask him regularly if there's anything that he needs that he isn't getting from me. So questions like, what do you feel you need? And what feelings did you experience today? I also asked him what his love language was. And this opened up a really interesting conversation, because what he worked out was that his love language was attention and physical contact. So I'm hugging him now more as a 19-year-old than I did when he was 11. And finally, getting more comfortable to let him fail at things without me intervening. For example, not waking him up when he sleeps in for his work and allowing his boss to deal with that situation. And then I can be there as a support for him afterwards. So just moving into my closing statement, I asked my son actually what had changed in my parenting approach from when he was younger to more recent years. And this is what he responded with on a text. He says, it's hard to describe, I guess. You just listened to me a lot more than trying to teach me things, like more compassion, like you talked in a way that I understood. So the journey from head to heart is a gradual process of increasing our awareness, healing our wounds, and reconnecting with our internal world of physical feelings, showing our feelings as an expression of love. And when we do this, we give our children and others permission to do the same. Thank you. Okay, so time for a pause and maybe a breath. and I'll take one too. And we have run over ever so slightly, so I want to apologise for that. But for those that are able to hang on, we will open up for questions now, and see if we can get through as many of these as possible. Let's go back. I'm just going to bring all these latest questions in and see if we can get one. Okay, so yeah, someone shared, I thought I was 100% fine before those breaths, but now I realise that I have a knot in my stomach after a difficult day at work. Didn't notice it before. That's worrying. If I didn't notice it in myself, how can I notice it in the kids I care for, my family or colleagues at work? Thanks for the exercise, eye-opening. Thank you for sharing as well. Yeah, that's the beauty of pausing to stop and check in. We can pick up these sensations, these feelings that we weren't aware of, and when we draw attention to them, it allows us it gives us the power to choose what we need to do with it, because it could be that we notice where it perhaps came from, and that's empowering. So yeah, thank you for raising that. And sometimes maybe a few more breaths with a longer exhale can actually then just bring a little bit more relaxation into the body, and allow some of the tension or stress that's been built up to release. Thank you for the question. So a few people saying relaxed. So question here for Joe. Joe, is there anything you can do if you keep trying to talk to your child, aiming for that breakthrough, but they refuse to communicate about anything, regardless of how many times you try? Great question.
It's a great question. I noticed that earlier, so thank you for that. I suppose it's really hard because we don't want to force something, do we? As we know, young people are going through a lot. They've got a lot going on in their heads. They've got a lot that they're trying to deal with. But what we can do is try and keep creating space and time and letting them know we're there for them when they're ready to talk. And sometimes that conversation can happen in the most unlikely situation. So can you get out and do something together? Can you spend some time together? Take the pressure off trying to have that conversation, but just be connected and just be present and just be there. And when you notice and when you reflect on what you notice in them and what's going on with their life, they begin to see that you really get it. Yeah. And that may help them to feel better about opening up at a time that they need that. We have to remember that children are going through lots and lots of things, and it's really a normal rite of passage, some of it as well. Is trying also to try and not feel too alarmed that maybe worrying you're not getting it right. Another thing that you can do is to ask your child, I'm wondering, maybe it sounds as if it's quite difficult to speak to me, but I wonder, who else could you talk to? And you could explore that with them. It could be another family member. It could be a neighbour or a family friend. It could be someone in school. It could be someone from a club that they go to. But that's what you're doing. You're helping them to find someone else. Because we should remember sometimes that children don't want to worry us as well. We're telling them that we're available and we want to be there. But they're also knowing that they don't want to worry you because they see that life is hard for you as it is for everybody. So I don't think it's about, there's no quick solution to that. I think it's about telling your child that you're there for them, that you love them, when they're ready to talk, if they're ready to talk, then you're ready to listen. But let's in the meantime together do some things together. Let's in the meantime together look at some information and resources. Tell them about tonight. Tell them about the things you learned. I thought it was really beautiful that Gary asked his child to critique him. And why don't you tell your child about this tonight? Tell them one thing that you learned, one thing you're going to take away, and engage them on what they think about that and what they think about conscious parenting. I think that's the best that you can do, is to be there, create time and space to listen, and at some point you may have that breakthrough. I hope that answers the question a little.
Thank you, Joe. Great. Excellent. I'm just trawling back through some of the other questions now. Where are we? So yeah, just somebody saying, yeah, that they felt emotional after your presentation, Joe, just could relate to it so much, both as a parent, as a support worker in schools. Thank you. Going a bit further up. Yeah, there's a question here. If I suggest swapping social media for something else or reframing things, gratitude lists, etc., I meet strong resistance. How can you persuade teenagers to take positive steps as a parent? You zig, they zag, besides listening. It's another good question.
Was that a question for myself? Sorry.
Probably it's kind of maybe partly kind of similar to the previous one you answered, but is there anything, you know, maybe talking to the specific aspects of, you know, swapping social media for something else? Because I'm sure that's something that a lot of parents will experience, you know, particularly with the overuse of technology and things like that with young people.
I think it's important to try and encourage the conversation about social media, and to acknowledge that it's got many wonderful aspects to it about connecting with others and finding out what's going on in the world and sharing our achievements, but also it's also maybe helping young people to make sense of some of the negative aspects of it as well, that it doesn't always make us feel very good, that what the reality of we see in other people's lives, what we see in other people's lives is not the reality. And I think it's about and trying to encourage that conversation. And I think it's just a little of what I've said before, is trying to create space and time to do other things together and to step away from that and to see how it feels and to notice how it feels. It's a hard one for sure. I'm going through the same with my child as well, who loves TikTok. And I've actually been trying to look at TikTok myself to try and understand what makes it so great. So I want to really connect with them in that way. And in order to do that, I need to really try and understand what it feels like for a young person. I'm not sure if I answered the question. It's a tricky one. I think it's to keep reaching out, to keep being there, and to help them to explore other interests and other things that they might like doing independently, but also with yourself as well.
Great stuff. Thank you, Joe. So something here from Andrina. She was just complimenting the speakers and just asking if we could share their Support for Families pages, which offers information on support. So again, that's in the chat for anybody who wants to access that. And what I'll do is I'll put that onto the email that's going to come out to everybody tomorrow, which has just got lots of different resources, a couple of PDFs and some other resources that we'll share with people, just so they've got access, everybody's got access to that. So yeah, I'll do that, Andrina. Thank you. So just having a look and see if we've got our sort of final questions, or perhaps something here, someone saying, Dr. Shefali mentioned how we are driven by our own childhood and how we see the world. We can be determined to do the opposite. How can that play out for our children, especially when we can still be triggered by things from childhood? Claire, I don't know if that's one that you can take, or...
Yeah, happy to take that one, Gary. So a few things around that is that, yes, we will be triggered by things from childhood, and yes, your children will trigger you. Dr. Shefali touched on that. Well, Gary, you touched on the fact that, you know, your relationship with your son's been such a great learning and a great he's been a great teacher. And I would say similarly with my daughter, I'm quite an easygoing person. I see myself as being very nurturing, kind of trying to be my best version of self as a parent. But my teenage years, my daughter, I found her so very triggering, because she became very angry and very reactive and very kind of passive aggressive. And it really made me look at my relationship with anger. I found being around anger really difficult. I was really triggered by her, but also it made me so in terms of how to handle that, when I was being triggered, I was being reactive and responding to her. But there was a few things that was a learning in that, so hopefully it will answer and speak to the question. One was the fact that I needed to be honest with her. I needed to say, this is how I experienced this. So not a you make me feel. This is how I experience this. This is what's going on for me. So when I respond in that way, I'm reacting to this X, Y, and Z. So not blaming her, not holding her accountable and making her feel guilty for what was going on for me, but being really honest and being vulnerable and saying that this was how I was perceiving or receiving it, and this was why. And then seeing if we could try to almost collaborate or come together in a solution. How could we manage this better? So we came up with the realization that actually in those moments she would be better if when her dad was available, for him stepping in and me stepping out to give myself a moment to pause. And that for her as well, I had been her safe place for a very long time. We had always been very close, so naturally I was the one she was going to vent with. So there was a whole host of those kind of considerations, but the honest conversation was really important, but so too the honest introspection of looking at myself and realizing where in me had I angry places or angry aspects of myself that I hadn't been okay to look at, that I hadn't allowed myself to heal, to turn towards, and how was that showing up in what I was seeing out there? Because they say what's in here shows up out there, and that it keeps showing up out there until we're ready to look at it and heal it. Now that's my belief. Not everybody may agree with that, but it really helped me to question: was there aspects of myself that where I had suppressed the anger, where I wasn't ready to turn towards it and do the healing work? And that again really helped as well. So yeah, the honest conversations, the making conscious the unconscious, and being brave enough to see what that might be trying to teach us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so we've got just the maybe final couple. One here about how would you define connection, and how can we learn to connect and help our partners to connect? Most of us live in a doer mode and like to find solutions. Yeah, I don't mind responding to that. I guess for me, our ability to connect and the depth of connection that we can have with other people depends on the depth of connection that we have with ourselves. So if we have perhaps, maybe we live a very busy life, and a lot of the things we're doing is we're always in doing mode, and therefore we don't perhaps have moments where we can actually go within and start to connect more deeply on the inside. So we need to take that time to spend on the inside, getting to know that inner environment, because that's where we start to become more aware of our emotional feelings and allow space for these things to emerge. And when we allow these things to emerge and we get more skillful understanding what's going on there, that's when our level of connection can become enhanced. But also there could be that, we could be we could be still maybe perhaps withholding in some way the level of connection. Again, it can be something that can be from from childhood, as we've touched on before. It's about how we find trust in relationships where we can fully open up and be ourselves. So it's an inside job to get the outer experience that we're looking for. I don't know if any of the other speakers would add anything to that.
No, great answer, Gary. Don't know that I've much to add to that, other than, it has to start with us first, because so much of this, we want to make it better for our young people, for our children, for the people we love. But everything that we've touched on is we have to start with us to see that change. So it feels counterintuitive, but until we show up for ourselves first and do that work on ourselves, that healing, like Dr. Trefali mentioned, we're not really going to see it happening in our outer reality, in our relationships with the people close to us.
Great stuff. Okay, so I think we've got through most of the questions that I can see. If there are any ones that we maybe miss, then I'll see if we can maybe grab these from the chat and then provide a response in the email that I send out tomorrow. But I would like to wrap things up there. We are 15 minutes late, so I apologise to everybody for that. But I would like to thank Joe and Claire for their excellent talks tonight. I got a lot from both of them, and thank everybody who joined the webinar tonight. It was wonderful to have so many people on. We didn't know when we created this how much interest there would be, but you know, we had just short of 400 people that registered on Eventbrite, and we had just short of 200 people who registered on Zoom. And I think we had, you know, certainly well over 100 that joined live tonight, and obviously other people will get access to the recording. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here tonight, and we hope to communicate with you all again soon, and definitely from tomorrow with the recording. Thank you.